On a quiet suburban sidewalk in broad daylight, Elijah, a 16-year-old black student, is walking home with his headphones on. But his peace is shattered when a white police officer pulls up beside him, demanding answers the boy doesn't owe. When the officer asks about his father's profession, Elijah calmly replies that his father is a federal operative. The officer laughs in his face, mocking loud and cruel. He calls the boy a liar, a delusional kid, but what the officer doesn't know is that man is real, and he's on his way. In the moments to come, he will make the officer regret his very first decision. Before we dive back into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? And if this kind of story speaks to you, don't forget to hit subscribe because the next episode is something you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Crest Hill Lane, painting the sidewalks gold as the wind stirred the leaves into soft, whispering swirls. The houses on Crest Hill Lane stood in perfect symmetry, white fences, trimmed hedges, American flags fluttering from porches. Every driveway held a silver SUV or a freshly waxed minivan. The sidewalks were clean, the mailboxes polished. It looked like a place that had never been touched by trouble. But Elijah Moore had learned long ago that peaceful didn't mean safe. 16 years old, Elijah was the only black teenager in this neighborhood. Thin frame, deep gaze, always watching. He'd grown up in this neighborhood, but he still felt like a visitor who'd overstayed his welcome. The Moores were the only black family in a 5-block radius, and after a decade here, Elijah still received the same polite but stiff smiles from neighbors and the same locked car doors as he walked past. That afternoon, Elijah walked home from school the same way he always did, hood up, head down, music in his ears, backpack snug on both shoulders. The sun was warm on his back. He kept to the sidewalk, feet stepping evenly on the cracked concrete slabs, eyes scanning the ground, not because he was lost in thought, but because he knew not to look too long at anyone. Near the corner of Pine and Crest Hill, he spotted a little girl in a yellow dress crying by a maple tree. Her balloon had gotten stuck high in the branches. She looked around helplessly, her tiny hands gripping the string just out of reach. Elijah paused, looked left, then right. No one else nearby. He crossed the street, carefully pulled off one earbud, and asked, "You want some help?" The girl sniffled and nodded. Elijah gave a faint smile. "Let me try something." He scanned the tree, then picked up a long stick lying near the base. He reached up, tapping at the branch, careful not to pop the balloon. It took a few tries, but the balloon eventually slipped free, floating gently down. The girl caught it midair and smiled. Elijah stepped back, not expecting anything, just glad it worked. But before she could say thank you, a voice rang out sharp and panicked. "Get away from her!" A woman's footsteps thundered against the sidewalk as she rushed from the house on the corner. Blonde hair tied back, eyes wild. She snatched the girl by the arm and yanked her behind. "What do you think you're doing?" the woman snapped, looking Elijah up and down like he'd just climbed out of a sewer. She lost her balloon. Elijah started his palms, instinctively rising in that all-too-familiar way black men learn to move when accused. "You were trying to take it from her," the woman barked. "I saw you standing over her like you were threatening her." "No," Elijah said quietly. "She needed help." "You people always have an excuse," she hissed, tightening her grip on her daughter. "Go on, get out of here. Before I call the cops." Elijah's face froze. His throat tightened. He took a slow breath, glanced at the girl who looked just as confused, and turned to walk away without another word. No one thanked him. No one apologized. He nodded once and turned away. No anger on his face, no words of protest. Just the same controlled stillness his father taught him. Walk away with your head high, but keep your guard higher. As he walked back across the street, he felt eyes behind curtains. A window closed, a door clicked shut, and he felt it, that quiet message, "You don't belong here." Not really, not ever. He pressed play on his music again, but the song didn't register. His thoughts were louder. This wasn't new. A month ago, the barista at Maple Cafe asked for his ID when he ordered a smoothie. He was 15 then. 2 other kids, both white, both taller than him, ordered before and after him without question. No ID required. Last week, a neighbor he'd known since grade school pulled her dog close when he jogged past. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that said, "Keep moving." Crest Hill Lane looked clean, but Elijah knew clean wasn't the same as welcoming. The sidewalks sparkled, but suspicion lived in the cracks. The sun dipped lower as he neared his street. A few houses down from his, a black SUV crept slowly around the corner. Elijah didn't think much of it until he heard the soft whir of a window lowering. "Hey you," the voice cut through the air. Elijah stopped. His hands left his pocket. The cruiser stopped beside him. The SUV was clearly unmarked, but the uniform inside wasn't. Officer Jacob Carter stepped out slowly, like he had something to prove. Elijah turned to face him, keeping his hands visible. "Yes, sir," he said, voice measured. Carter was tall, late 30s, with a buzz cut and a jaw that looked clenched, even when it wasn't. His badge gleamed on his chest, and his boots were too clean for someone who claimed to be working patrol. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Carter asked, squinting at Elijah. Elijah blinked. "I live here, just walking home from school." Carter looked him over. Hoodie, backpack, black skin. That was enough. "You have ID. I don't drive yet. Just my school ID." "Let me see it." Elijah moved slowly, lifting the front flap of his backpack, reaching with deliberate care. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Carter snapped. Elijah froze, breath-catching. He raised his hands again. "It's right here, sir. Inside the front pouch." Carter walked around, standing too close, eyes scanning the sidewalk like he expected to find drugs or a gun instead of textbooks. "Name Elijah Moore." Carter crossed his arms. "You say you live here. What's your address?" 1438 Crest Hill Lane. "Who lives there with you?" "My mom." "My dad, he's away for work." "What kind of work?" There was a change in the tone. Less official now, more curious, more calculated. Elijah hesitated. Then, because he was tired of the assumptions, tired of the lies people built around him, he answered honestly. "He works for the federal government." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Doing what he's in. Special operations. Federal agent." There was a pause. Then Carter laughed. Not a chuckle-full, mocking laughter that echoed down the street. "Special ops? Huh, Hollywood kid right here." Elijah's cheeks burned. Carter turned back toward his vehicle, shaking his head. "Sure thing, kid. Next time you want to sound impressive, at least pick something believable." He looked back over his shoulder. "What's next?" "Your dad's Jason-born Elijah didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched." His heart pounded, but his face was unreadable. Carter climbed back into the cruiser. "Stay out of trouble," he called out the window, already rolling up. As the SUV drove off, Elijah slowly turned back toward home. He didn't rush. His hands stayed out of his pockets, but his throat tightened. His jaw clenched. He could feel the burn of eyes through windows, judging, waiting, confirming whatever story they wanted to believe. The front steps of his house came into view. His legs felt heavy, his thoughts heavier. That night, as he sat on his bed staring at the ceiling, Elijah replayed every second of the day. The balloon, the accusation, the officer's laughter. And then he remembered something his father once told him on a quiet night years ago when he came home crying from school. Elijah Victor Moore had said, his voice calm, "They're going to see your skin before they see you. Don't give them your fire. Give them silence. Let your dignity speak louder than any defense." And so Elijah had done exactly that. But silence, he realized, still burned. The front door clicked shut behind Elijah with a soft thud. The familiar scent of lemon polish and jasmine candles drifted through the hallway. It was the kind of scent that usually felt comforting, like home. But not today. Today it felt like walking into a place where the walls might ask questions he didn't want to answer. Angela Moore stood in the kitchen, tying her long dark hair back as she removed her hospital ID badge and placed it on the counter. She had just changed out of her navy scrubs and into a crisp white blouse and slacks. Everything about her was precise, her clothes, her posture, her tone of voice. Years working as a hospital administrator had made her calm, under pressure firm, but kind. But that didn't mean she didn't notice things. She heard Elijah's footsteps before she saw him. Slow, heavy, not the usual shuffle of a tired teenager. This was different. "Hey, baby," she said, gently turning as he walked in. "Hey, Mom." She looked at him for a moment. His shoulders were tense. His eyes didn't quite meet hers. His backpack was still slung over one shoulder, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or go. "How was school?" she asked, casually, moving to the sink to rinse a coffee mug. "Fine." Angela dried the mug, but her hand slowed for a second. That was it. Just that one word, fine. Too quick, too flat. "Just fine." She pressed her voice, still light. Elijah dropped his backpack by the door and leaned against the wall. "Yeah, just the usual." Angela turned, drying her hands on a towel, and studied her son more closely. His hoodie was zipped all the way up despite the warmth outside. His jaw was tight. There was a silence between them, and in that silence, a mother's instinct sharpened. "Elijah," she said, her voice more focused now. "What happened?" He glanced away. "Nothing." Angela stepped closer. "You're walking like someone who's carrying something heavy. Tell me." Elijah took a slow breath. He knew she wasn't going to let it go. She never did, and deep down, he didn't want her to. But he also didn't want to add to the weight she already carried every day. The way she smiled through exhaustion, the way she triple-locked the doors at night, the way she looked out the window a second longer when he left for school each morning. "There was a cop," he said finally. "New guy. Stopped me on Ridgeview." Angela's jaw tightened, barely noticeable, but Elijah caught it. "He asked what I was doing there. What did you say?" "That I live here." And Elijah looked at her now, really looked. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them, a flicker, like a match held just above the wick. He wanted ID. I gave him my school card. Then he asked who I lived with. Angela waited silent. I said, "You work at the hospital, and that Dad's away for work." Still, she said nothing. He kept asking. Elijah continued, wanted to know what kind of work. I told him, "Dad works for the federal government." Angela didn't move. I told him he was special ops. Her hands slowly folded in front of her. Her knuckles were pale from the tension. "Elijah." Her voice was calm, but low-controlled. I didn't go into detail, he added quickly. He was acting like I made it up. Like it was funny. I wasn't trying to tell everything, but I couldn't let him think Dad abandoned us. I couldn't let him laugh in my face. Angela stepped back and leaned against the counter, staring at the floor for a long moment. Then she looked up. "You remember what we've always said about your father's work?" "Yes." "Then why?" "Because he looked at me like I was a liar, like I was trash, like I didn't belong here." Elijah's voice cracked slightly, but he held it in, and I just wanted him to know, my dad is someone. Angela's eyes softened, but her body stayed still. "You are someone," she said firmly, "with or without him." Elijah looked away. "I'm not mad at you," she said after a pause. "But I need you to understand this isn't just about pride or respect. This is about safety. I know. No, baby. You don't." Her voice lowered even more. "Your father's work isn't just sensitive. It's dangerous. People asking questions, even simple ones, can start things we can't control." Elijah swallowed hard. "Do you know how long we've protected this?" She continued. 16 years. 16 years of keeping our heads down. Not because we're ashamed, but because being seen, really seen, can be a threat. She stepped forward, her voice trembling just enough to show she wasn't just angry. She was scared. When you tell a police officer, anyone, that your dad is special forces, you're not just telling a story. You're lighting a signal flare. "I'm sorry." Angela nodded once, then pulled him into a hug. It wasn't something they did often anymore. Elijah was growing older, taller, more private. But tonight, he didn't resist. He let her arms wrap around him. He needed it more than he wanted to admit. After a few seconds, she pulled back. "If anyone asks again," she said, "you tell them he works in government consulting. That's it. Even if they push, especially if they push." Elijah nodded, but inside something felt wrong. It wasn't just about secrecy. It felt like hiding, like shrinking himself to stay safe. And he didn't know if he could keep doing that forever. Later that night after dinner, Elijah sat on his bed, homework open in front of him, but untouched. His phone buzzed. A message from Mia Ramirez. "Need to talk. Tomorrow. About the cop." He stared at it. "How did she know?" He typed a short reply. "Okay." Then he set the phone down and leaned back against the wall. Outside his window, the street was quiet. A few porch lights glowed, curtains drawn, cars parked neatly in driveways. But behind those curtains, behind those smiles from earlier, Elijah wondered how many had watched the encounter. How many had seen the SUV slow down, the officer get out, the boy in the hoodie stand there like a suspect, and how many had done nothing. It wasn't that they didn't care. Maybe they just didn't know how to care in a way that mattered. Or maybe they cared only if it didn't disturb the image of peace they held so tightly. Angela walked past his room, pausing briefly at the door. She didn't say anything. Just lingered for a second, then moved on. He knew she was listening, waiting, always. He closed his laptop and stared at the ceiling. That cop saw me before he saw me. The thought played on repeat, like a loop, like a truth he wished wasn't true. And the worst part wasn't that it happened. The worst part was that it didn't surprise him at all. Because deep down, he'd already been taught some kids grow up learning math and history. Others grow up learning how not to be mistaken for a threat. The morning after the sidewalk encounter with Elijah Moore, Officer Jacob Carter sat alone in his patrol car, parked outside Crest Hill Market. His coffee had gone cold untouched on the dashboard. His eyes weren't on traffic or pedestrians. They were fixed on a folded printout in his lap, Elijah's school records, academic honors, no suspensions, a clean sheet, too clean. Carter tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. He'd been a cop long enough to trust his gut, and something about that boy's story, it didn't sit right. Not the way he looked him in the eye, not the way he calmly dropped that line about special ops like it was nothing. No kid that age says that without a reason, and no kid says it without meaning to impress or intimidate or distract. Carter told himself this wasn't personal, just curiosity, routine. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about the kid. It was about the father. The name Victor Moore had been lodged in his brain like a splinter ever since the stop. Something about it clung to him, and the more he thought about it, the more he needed answers. He'd seen it before, men hiding things behind respectable titles, government work, consulting, special ops. It was always vague enough to dodge scrutiny, but polished enough to sound legitimate. Carter had been trained to see through that kind of fog, or at least he liked to believe he had. Back at the station, he logged into the department's database, a system not meant for personal rabbit holes, but used that way far too often. He entered Victor Moore's name. The first layer was public vehicle registration home ownership marriage license, all standard, married to Angela Moore, employed at Crest Hill General Hospital. Home address matched what Elijah had said. Nothing jumped out. Carter clicked deeper. Employment history blank. Military service redacted. He blinked. The file wasn't empty. It was sealed, restricted, a black box of digital silence. He tried another query. Access denied. Carter leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen like it had just insulted him. He wasn't military, not really. He'd washed out of basic after 12 weeks, discharged before ever setting foot outside the state. But the uniform still fit. The badge gave him something the Army didn't: authority. And he wasn't going to let some ghost in a file outrank him in his own neighborhood. He pulled out a notebook from his desk drawer and scribbled, "More Victor Possible Background Classified Contractor." That night, Carter returned to Crest Hill, not in his cruiser, but in his personal car, a beat-up black Charger with tinted windows. He parked 2 blocks from the Moore house, engine off, lights dimmed. The street was quiet, most porch lights already dark. He watched through binoculars as the living room light clicked off in the Moore home. A shadow passed behind the blinds. Then stillness. He didn't move. Just watched, logged the patterns. 2 hours passed before he left. That morning, Carter returned to Crest Hill, not in his cruiser, but in his personal car. A black Dodge Charger with tinted windows parked 2 blocks from the Moore residence. He wore jeans and a tucked-in polo, blending into the suburban quiet like he belonged. He walked down the sidewalk with a clipboard in one hand, stopping near a white picket fence where Martha Jenkins was crouched beside her rose bushes. She wore garden gloves and a wide straw hat, the kind of neighbor who always watched from behind curtains, but never missed a moment to comment. "Good morning, ma'am," Carter said with a polite smile, flashing his badge. "Officer Jacob Carter, just getting familiar with the area." Martha stood up slowly, brushing dirt off her gloves. "New officer?" she asked, not quite smiling back. "Yes, ma'am. Transferred in last month. Just checking in on neighborhoods, seeing if there are any concerns I should be aware of." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Everything's usually quiet here," she said. "Until recently." "Recently?" She hesitated, then glanced down the street toward the Moore house. "That family moved in about 10 years ago. Always kept to themselves." Carter nodded, playing it cool. Victor and Angela Moore, right, and the boy, Elijah. Martha gave a short hum, not quite agreement. "Angela's fine, professional, keeps to herself, which I prefer. The boy," she paused, voice tightening, "walks around with that hood pulled over his head like he's hiding something, never says hello, always looking like he's up to no good." Carter didn't interrupt, he just let her talk. "I don't want to say anything rude, officer, but people move to Crest Hill to avoid certain kinds of behavior." "What kind of behavior?" he asked casually. Martha tilted her head, her tone dropping into something lower-coded. "You know what I mean. All that attitude, always acting like we're the problem when we're just trying to feel safe in our own homes." Carter gave a small nod, writing something on his clipboard that didn't need to be written. "And the father." Her mouth twitched. "Barely ever seen. Supposedly works for the government or something important. But who really knows? He ever caused trouble, not directly. but something about him just feels off. That house is always too quiet, too perfect. People like that, they don't show you their mess. They hide it. Makes you wonder what they're really covering up. Carter smiled thinly. Well, I appreciate your time, ma'am. Let me know if anything unusual happens. Martha nodded, returning to her flowers. Just hope that boy doesn't bring the wrong kind of attention to the neighborhood. We've done just fine without all that. He asked the same questions up and down the block. But Victor remains a mystery. Always had been. That mystery started to gnaw at Carter. What kind of man lived in a place like this, stayed invisible, and didn't leave a trail? What kind of job sealed your records so tightly that even a law enforcement clearance couldn't crack them? He told himself he was looking out for the neighborhood, that his job was to protect and serve. But somewhere along the way, protection had twisted into pursuit, and pursuit into obsession. That evening, Carter sat in his apartment. The lights dimmed a web of papers and photos spread across his kitchen table like a crime board from a detective movie. He had satellite images of the Moore house, copies of vehicle registrations, notes on school drop-offs and grocery runs. He zoomed in on a photo he'd taken from the bushes the night before, a blurry shot of Victor's silhouette through the living room window. There was no crime, no complaint, no cause, just the throb of suspicion in his chest that wouldn't let go. He called in a favor. "Frank, it's Carter." The voice on the other end sounded tired. "You again. You still got access to federal databases." There was a pause. "What are you doing, Jacob? I need you to run a name." "Victor Moore." "I think he's hiding something." Frank sighed. "You've already been suspended once for digging into someone without cause. This is different. This guy's records are sealed, which means you should leave it alone, which means it's worth looking into." Frank muttered something under his breath. "You didn't hear this from me," he said finally. "But if you start poking around in the wrong places, someone might poke back." Carter hung up and stared at the wall. That was fine. Let them poke. He'd find what he needed. And if he couldn't, he'd keep watching until the man slipped up. Because there was no way someone like Victor Moore could live that clean. No way a black man with a teenage son living in a white neighborhood working for the government was as legitimate as he looked. Not in Carter's world, not in the one he believed he was protecting. He told himself this was about safety, about vigilance, about doing what no one else was willing to do. But the truth was simpler. Officer Jacob Carter saw power in the hands of someone who didn't look like him, and he wanted it back, even if he had to take it piece by invading privacy, bending the law, and stalking a family who had done nothing but exist. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a quiet neighborhood is the man who thinks he's the only one allowed to keep it quiet. Crest Hill High buzzed like a hive at lunch hour. Plastic trays clattered on tabletops. Conversations blurred into one constant low hum. Teachers monitored from a distance, half watching, half hoping. The next 30 minutes passed without incident. Elijah Moore sat alone at the end of a table near the windows, a peanut butter sandwich untouched in front of him, headphones looped around his neck, backpack zipped and resting against his leg like he could get up and leave at any moment. He wasn't eating. He wasn't hungry. He was trying to disappear. But disappearing wasn't easy when people whispered your name in every hallway. It had started that morning. In first period, a kid 2 rows behind him had leaned over and muttered, "Special ops, seriously," then stifled a laugh. In second, a group of girls had passed by him in the hallway, giggling, one of them saying, just loud enough, "Maybe his dad's the president too." By lunch, the video had spread. Someone had clipped it just the part where Officer Carter mocked Elijah for claiming his father was in special operations. "Hollywood kid," the officer had said. "Maybe your dad works with Tom Cruise." That snippet, lifted from a neighbor's Ring camera across the street, had been posted to a private student group the night before. By morning, it had gone school-wide. The camera didn't capture what happened before or after. Not the steady way Elijah had spoken, not the fact he'd complied, kept his hands in sight, didn't escalate. Just that one moment. The laugh, the mockery, the implication. Elijah hadn't watched it. He didn't need to. He remembered every second of it already. He stared out the window, trying to breathe through the tightness in his chest. It didn't help. He heard them before he saw them. Tyson Blake's voice carried like a rock skipping across a pond. Loud, cruel, confident. "Well, if it isn't G.I. Joe Jr. Tyson announced, walking up with 2 of his buddies in tow. Elijah didn't look up. Tyson stood just a few feet away. He was tall for 16. wore varsity football jackets like a uniform, blonde, square-jawed, smug in a way only someone who'd never been told no could be. He dropped his tray on the table across from Elijah and leaned forward. "My dad saw that video last night," he said. He laughed so hard he almost choked on his steak. Elijah still didn't look up. He said, "Your dad probably works at a gas station. Special ops, right. Special ops of pumping unleaded." One of Tyson's friends snorted. Elijah blinked slowly. He picked up a chip from his tray and bit into it, chewing without interest. "I mean," Tyson continued, "you could have just said your dad was gone. No need to make up fairy tales. You think people here are stupid?" Now Elijah looked at him. He didn't speak. He didn't frown. He just met Tyson's eyes and held the stare. Tyson shifted slightly, the moment stretching longer than he'd expected. "Whatever, man," he muttered. "Everyone knows you're full of it. Maybe if your dad really was somebody, you wouldn't be eating lunch alone." He turned, but before he could leave, a voice cut across the air. Actually, the girl said he wasn't lying. All eyes turned toward the voice. Mia Ramirez stood at the end of the table, arms crossed over her chest, dark eyes steady. She was short, wore denim overalls over a t-shirt with a feminist quote scrawled across the front, and had a messenger bag that practically dragged on the floor. Her curly hair was tied back in a high bun, and she looked like she didn't care if she was interrupting anyone's moment. "Excuse me," Tyson asked, smirking. "I said," she repeated, walking forward. "He wasn't lying. I was there. I saw it happen." Elijah looked up at her, surprise flickering across his face. "I recorded it," Mia said, turning slightly. "The full thing." "Not just the edited garbage that's going around," Tyson scoffed. "You what? You spying on him now? I was walking home," Mia said calmly. The officer stopped Elijah for no reason. He didn't do anything wrong. He was respectful. He did everything they say you're supposed to do, and that cop still treated him like trash. She let her words hang in the air. "You know what's funny," she added. "You're all making fun of him, but none of you would have stayed that calm if it were you." Tyson's face reddened. "No one asked you." Mia shrugged. "Didn't need to be asked. Some of us actually believe in not being cowards." Tyson took a step forward, but Mia didn't flinch. Neither did Elijah. By now, the cafeteria had gone quieter. A few phones were out. People were watching, waiting. Tyson turned to Elijah one last time. "Whatever, man. You're still a liar." Elijah looked at him. Calm, measured. "I don't need you to believe me." Tyson stared, then turned and walked away, tray untouched. His friends followed, less sure of themselves than before. Mia dropped her bag beside Elijah's tray and sat down across from him. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I did." He looked away, still shaken but not broken. She opened her water bottle, took a sip, looked around. "I hate this place sometimes," she said. "All these kids acting like they're so smart. But when something real happens, they'd rather laugh than ask questions." Elijah nodded faintly. "My dad's a civil rights attorney," Mia said after a pause. "He always says silence helps the wrong people." Elijah finally smiled, just barely. "Sounds like someone I'd like to meet." "Yeah, well, he's loud. You'd hear him coming." They sat in silence for a few moments. Across the cafeteria, a few students watched them. Some looked away when Elijah met their eyes. Others didn't. A few nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something. Later that afternoon, as the final bell rang and students poured out of the school like a wave, Mia walked beside Elijah to the bus stop. She nudged him. "You know," she said, "I'm going to post the full video." "You sure?" he asked. "It might stir things up." She gave him a look. "Things are already stirred. Might as well tell the truth." He didn't argue. That night, the full clip went live. No edits, no cuts. Just a straightforward, shaky phone recording of an officer stepping out of his cruiser, questioning a teenager who'd done nothing wrong. The voice of Elijah calm and respectful, the mocking tone of Officer Carter, the smirk, the laugh. It was just under 2 minutes long, but it said more than hours of explanations ever could. By morning, it had over 500 shares. By afternoon, it had reached the inbox of a local news producer, and by evening, it had landed on the desk of a civil liberties watchdog group. But none of that mattered as much as what happened in school the next day, because the next day, Elijah didn't sit alone at lunch. He sat with Mia, and 2 other students joined, not because they were trying to make a statement, not because they suddenly became best friends, but because for the first time they saw Elijah Moore not as the boy in the hoodie, but as the boy who stood up by staying still, as the boy who told the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet, because sometimes the bravest thing a young man can do is to look someone in the eye, even when the whole room is laughing, and say, "I don't need you to believe me." Earlier that afternoon, Elijah had just stepped out of history class when two uniformed officers approached him in the hallway. One of them, Officer Carter, wasn't even in full uniform, but his presence was unmistakable. Elijah Moore, the taller one, asked. Elijah froze mid-step. "Yeah, you need to come with us," Carter said, already reaching for his arm. "What for?" Elijah asked, instinctively pulling back. His classmates slowed their steps. Phones came out. "Obstruction of an ongoing investigation," Carter stated flatly. "Let's go." "I didn't do anything," Elijah replied, his voice rising slightly. "We're not arguing, kid." "You can explain it downtown," Carter snapped. Students watched as Elijah was cuffed in front of his locker. No warning, no explanation, no school administrator in sight. They didn't even let him call his mother. The fluorescent lights of the Oak Ridge Police Department buzzed faintly as the front desk sergeant typed with 2 fingers on a sticky keyboard. Rain pattered gently outside, drumming against the glass doors in a steady rhythm. The front lobby was quiet, too quiet for what had just taken place an hour earlier. Inside one of the holding rooms, Elijah Moore sat with his wrists loosely cuffed to a metal chair. His backpack had been emptied onto the table books, a water bottle, a pencil pouch. No drugs, no weapons, no crime. Still, he sat there, breathing slowly, trying to keep his heart from pounding out of his chest. He wasn't charged with anything. He was being held, and he knew why. Down the hallway, Officer Carter leaned against a desk phone in hand. He dialed a number from a file he had memorized days ago. The number wasn't listed in any system, but Carter had his ways. He had been waiting for this moment. The line rang once, twice, then answered. Moore speaking, the voice said, deep, even, unmistakable. "This is Officer Jacob Carter from Oak Ridge Heights PD. Your son's in custody. You'll need to come down to the station." A long pause followed. Carter waited, pressing the phone harder against his ear, as if that would make the silence crack. "What's the charge?" Victor Moore's voice came back calm, but colder. "Obstruction. We had some questions." He got defensive. Another pause. "I'll be there." Carter hung up and smiled. The trap was set. Victor Moore didn't come immediately. He waited. Not because he wasn't concerned, but because he'd been in this game too long to walk in blind. He sat alone in his study for several minutes after the call ended, fingers tapping rhythmically on the hardwood arm of his chair. His eyes were steady but distant, scanning through possibilities. Every move had meaning. Every second was a test. He stood slowly, walked to a locked drawer, and retrieved a slim leather wallet. Inside, a government-issued ID card bordered in deep red, the kind that didn't flash like gold, but burned quietly, like warning flares. He pocketed it, zipped up a plain black jacket, and stepped out into the night. At the Oak Ridge Police Department, the usual background noise of phones and keyboards hummed like always. But there was a tension in the air. It wasn't loud, but it was real. At precisely 8:21 p.m., the front doors opened. No rush, no slamming, just the quiet click of leather boots on tile. Victor Moore walked in like he belonged there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a frame that didn't bend to authority. It was authority. He wore no badge, carried no weapon, but no one in the room doubted for a second he was dangerous. The desk sergeant looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" Victor didn't answer right away. He pulled out the ID wallet, opened it, and laid it gently on the counter. The red trim caught the sergeant's eyes first, then the seal, then the name. The man blinked. Yes, sir. Let me get Sergeant Wallace." Victor didn't move. Wallace appeared seconds later, summoned by a silent code in the building's nervous system. He was in his mid-50s with the weary face of someone who'd seen more than he admitted. The moment he spotted the ID, his entire demeanor shifted. Mr. Moore Wallace said, not with friendliness, but with caution, "I'm Sergeant Paul Wallace. We didn't expect you called." Victor said, "I'm here. Yes, your son Elijah is in room 3. No charges have been filed. It's a setup," Victor said. Wallace hesitated. Victor didn't. He was arrested without warrant. Again. No probable cause. No legal standing. Wallace's throat bobbed. "Where's Carter?" "Down the hall," Wallace replied. Victor didn't ask permission. He walked past the desk, past officers who didn't make eye contact, and stopped in front of room 3. Inside, Elijah sat up straight when the door opened. His eyes widened slightly. "Dad." Victor stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and looked him over. "No bruises. No marks, but Elijah's jaw was tight. His hands were clenched in his lap. "You all right?" Elijah nodded. "They didn't say anything, just held me." Victor gave him a nod of understanding, then turned toward the hallway again. Carter was already walking in, trying to posture. "Mr. Moore, glad you could make it. We had some questions about." Victor held up his hand. Carter stopped. "Let me be clear," Victor said, his tone even but cold. "You don't get to use my son to summon me. You don't get to harass a minor under the color of law. You don't get to operate outside your jurisdiction of reason." Carter straightened, trying to reassert himself. "He's involved in something." "No. You're involved," Victor said, "in something you don't understand, something above your clearance." He pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket and handed it to Wallace, who had silently joined them. "This is a federal notice of investigation, Internal Affairs Civil Rights Division. It includes your officer's previous conduct witness testimony and a legal request for all documents related to both arrests of Elijah Moore." Wallace's face paled as he scanned the document. Victor turned back to Carter. "Here's what you need to understand. There are lines. You crossed several." Carter opened his mouth, then shut it. "You thought dragging my son in would force me into the light," Victor continued. "You thought I'd come angry, loud, give you something to record, but you forget real power doesn't come with noise." Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping to something only Carter could hear. "It comes with evidence, with procedure, with people watching from places you don't even know exist." Carter's skin flushed red. "You'll hear from my attorney," Victor said, "but tonight I'm taking my son home." He turned to Wallace. "Are we done here?" Wallace nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Elijah stood still, holding his backpack. His eyes were wide, his breath steady but shallow. Victor placed a firm hand on his shoulder. As they walked through the station, officers stepped back, not out of respect, out of instinct, the instinct that tells you when someone is not to be touched, not to be followed. The moment the glass doors closed behind them, Elijah exhaled slowly. Victor unlocked the car, slid in, started the engine. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Elijah spoke. "Dad, who are you?" Victor didn't answer right away. "I'm the man they were hoping wouldn't show up." He pulled the car into gear and drove toward home. And for the first time in days, Elijah's hands finally unclenched. It was well past midnight when Officer Jacob Carter shut the hood of his personal SUV and muttered to himself, "Tonight's the night." His breath hung in the cold air as he looked toward the others, 4 officers in plain clothes, all standing around their unmarked vehicles in a dark parking lot 2 blocks from the Moore residence. They weren't on duty. No warrants had been filed. No official briefing had taken place. This was Carter's plan, and they had all agreed to follow it, some out of loyalty, some out of shared resentment, and others simply out of curiosity. "Target house is dark. Lights out since 10, Carter said, checking his watch. "We're in. Quiet. Fast. No breaking anything unless you have to. Just documentation. Evidence. That's all we need." "Still doesn't feel right," murmured Officer Dwyer, adjusting the strap on his gear bag. "You want to know who that guy really is or not?" Carter snapped. "You saw what he did back at the station, walking in like he owned the place. Nobody questions him. Wallace freezes up like a school kid. That's not normal." Another officer, Reyes, nodded reluctantly. "Let's just get it done." One by one, the men climbed into their vehicles. None of the engines started. Carter twisted the key. Nothing. He tried again. The lights flickered, then died. Total silence. He reached for the radio on his shoulder and tapped it. Dead. His brows furrowed. He turned to look at Dwyer's car. The officer was outside now, shaking his head, lifting the hood of his cruiser. "All power's dead. Batteries drained." "No way," Carter muttered. All of them, Reyes, stepped out from the shadows, phone in hand. "My phone's not turning on." Carter stared down the road toward the Moore house. Just a single-story structure with trimmed hedges and a quiet porch. It looked like any other home in Crest Hill, completely still. Nothing visibly out of place, but something was wrong. The air was too still. "Everyone gear up," Carter said through gritted teeth. "We go on foot." They moved like shadows, cutting through backyards and ducking beneath fences. Carter's steps were controlled, but inside his chest was tightening. Every light from nearby homes felt like a searchlight. Every rustle in the bushes sent adrenaline flooding his limbs. When they reached the Moore property line, Carter held up a hand, signaling a stop. "The shed," he whispered. "That's where we start. Left side near the back fence." They crept along the side of the house. The grass had been recently cut. The pavement was clean. No security signs in the windows. Just that eerie quiet. The shed was locked as expected. Carter pulled out a flathead tool and began to pick the lock. "Cover me." No one responded. He turned. They were all frozen. Silent. "What?" he whispered. Dwyer pointed toward the corner of the backyard. "Camera." A small black device, barely larger than a coin, was perched beneath the gutter, blinking faintly. "Kill it." Reyes aimed a small flashlight at it. The light blinked once, then stopped. "I didn't touch anything." "That's not a motion sensor," Carter said quietly. "That's a response." He finally popped the lock on the shed and opened the door. Empty. Rake. Lawnmower. A pair of gloves. No weapons. No files. Nothing. He stepped inside, breathing faster now, scanning the walls for any sign of hidden compartments. Nothing. Then faintly, so soft it could have been a breeze, he heard it. A voice. Coming from behind him. They're inside now. Carter turned sharply. No one there. But it hadn't been imagined. The voice had come through a hidden speaker somewhere nearby. "They're moving toward the shed. All vehicles remain disabled. No need for contact. Let them see what control feels like." Carter's skin went cold. They weren't just being watched. They were being allowed in. He rushed back out into the yard. "Everyone regroup. Now." But the group wasn't intact. Officer Hamilton was gone. "Where is he?" Carter hissed. They scanned the dark yard. Then a porch light clicked on from the house next door. Hamilton stood there. Not unconscious. Not hurt. Just still. A teenage boy, barely 16, stood across from him, holding out a phone. "You dropped this, Elijah Moore," said voice steady. Hamilton took the phone wordlessly and backed away. Carter's breath caught. He turned his gaze toward the Moore house. The curtain in the living room window moved slightly. A figure stood there, half hidden, watching. Victor Moore. No weapons, no shouting, just watching. Dwyer was already moving back toward the street. "We need to go." Carter followed, heart-racing, jaw clenched. But when they returned to their vehicles, nothing had changed. Every car was still dead, every phone still blank. No signal, no explanation. Then all at once, each phone buzzed back to life. Each car alarm chirped once, then again. Lights flashed, batteries engaged. No damage, no hacks, just permission. Carter looked around. The whole block was quiet again. Just another night in a quiet neighborhood. No one spoke on the drive back. At the station, Sergeant Wallace waited by the entrance. He looked at them one by one, and then at Carter. "I don't want a single word of what happened tonight on paper," Wallace said. Carter swallowed hard. Wallace stepped closer. That man didn't call the cops, didn't press charges, didn't raise a voice, and still made every one of you look like fools. Reyes opened his mouth. Wallace cut him off. "Do you understand what power that takes? You break into someone's property and they don't retaliate. They just let you see what they're capable of." He stepped even closer to Carter. "This was your game. Now you've lost. Walk away." Carter said nothing. Wallace continued. "He didn't come out with a gun. He didn't send lawyers. He didn't threaten your career. He just turned your own choices into a lesson." He paused. "Let that sit. That's the difference between control and chaos." The next morning, Elijah stood at the front steps of the school. Mia joined him, nodding toward his phone. "You see it?" Elijah checked the screen. An anonymous clip had surfaced night vision footage of 4 officers wandering in circles behind the Moore house. The caption read, "Some lessons don't need fists, just a mirror." Thousands of views already. Mia smiled. That wasn't revenge. That was brilliance. Elijah didn't smile. He just said, "That's my father." Carter had no intention of stopping. Curiosity and anger had completely taken over his mind. He wanted to prove that he wasn't wrong, to prove that this stupid world was seeing everything the wrong way, and to prove that no black man deserved to live well. And so he began his plan. Elijah Moore didn't notice the van at first. It was parked slightly off-center across the street from the school parking lot, just a white, unmarked utility vehicle, like the ones landscapers or delivery crews used. Nothing about it looked suspicious. Nothing screamed danger. That was the point. The day had been long tense. Ever since the video of Officer Carter harassing him had gone viral, school had become a gauntlet of whispers, smirks, and sideways glances. Some students avoided eye contact. Others stared too long. Even teachers walked on eggshells around him. It wasn't just scrutiny. It was isolation. Elijah kept his head down as he left the building, hoodie up, earbuds, and not playing anything, just a habit now. A shield. The sky was an overcast gray, the kind that pressed down on the streets like a weight. He glanced around instinctively, years of his father's training embedded in his routine. That's when he noticed the figure leaning against the van. Broad shoulders, civilian clothes, sunglasses at dusk. Elijah's chest tightened. He slowed. The man straightened when he saw Elijah approach the sidewalk. "Need a ride, son," the man called out, voice too casual. Elijah didn't answer. He shifted direction, cutting toward the corner of the parking lot. Then he heard the second pair of footsteps. Behind him, his instincts kicked in. Run! But before his legs could react, someone grabbed his arm from behind, tight practice, not clumsy like a schoolyard bully. A second hand clamped over his mouth. Adrenaline surged. He twisted, elbowed back hard, connected with someone's ribs. There was a grunt, a stumble. Shut him up. The van's side door slid open. Elijah tried to scream, but a punch to the gut folded him over. The air fled his lungs like a kicked drum. He was dragged, limbs flailing but overpowered, and shoved into the back. The door slammed. The van pulled off before he could orient himself. Darkness, rubber mats, no windows. Zip ties around his wrists within seconds. Duct tape on his ankles. The floor rattled beneath him. His heart pounded so hard it echoed in his ears. Not a prank. Not a scare. This was a kidnapping. He tried to regulate his breathing. Slow. In. Out. Just like Victor had taught him when he was 8 and woke from a nightmare convinced someone was in the hallway. Back then, it was just shadows. Now it was real. "Get the live stream gear ready," one of the voices said. "He'll come." Elijah lay still, eyes wide, ears straining for every detail. "You really think he's going to show?" another asked. "He always does," came the answer. Cold. Certain. Carter. Elijah's breath caught. Of course it was him. He'd lost everything, his badge, his credibility, his control, and now he was spiraling. Victor hadn't retaliated. He hadn't raised his voice or pressed charges. That terrified Carter more than any threat ever could, and now he wanted to force Victor's hand, use Elijah as bait. The van rattled onto a gravel path, then stopped. He heard the door slide open again. Rough hands grabbed him and dragged him out. He saw just enough through the blindfold to catch rusted walls, graffiti-broken windows covered with plywood. A warehouse, abandoned, middle of nowhere. They hauled him inside, sat him on a cold folding chair, and zip-tied him to it. The sky over Crest Hill was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no passing cars, no footsteps on the sidewalk. Just silence. But deep inside an abandoned shipping warehouse on the city's outskirts, the air was anything but still. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above rows of rusted shelving. The metal walls creaked from old age, not from movement. And at the center of the open floor, under the only working overhead bulb, a teenage boy sat slumped in a metal chair, wrists bound in front of him, with zip ties, ankles taped to the chair legs. Elijah Moore's hoodie was torn. A small cut on his cheek had dried into a crusted smear of blood. His heart pounded not from pain, but from uncertainty. How far was Officer Carter willing to go? The man pacing nearby didn't look like the Carter Elijah remembered from school hallways. His usually crisp uniform had been replaced with jeans and a wrinkled shirt. Sweat clung to his collar. His jaw twitched every few seconds like he was fighting some invisible itch. But the worst part wasn't the gear or the sweat, it was his eyes. Carter's eyes had crossed some internal line. He wasn't here as a police officer anymore. He was here as a man, desperate to prove something, and willing to use Elijah to do it. "You think he's coming?" Carter muttered aloud, more to himself than to Elijah. "He's supposed to be this big damn ghost, this secret something. Let's see if he shows when it actually counts." Elijah didn't respond. Every second that passed was a new battle to stay calm, to remember what his father had taught him. Stay aware. Stay silent. Stay upright. "You hear me?" Carter snapped, walking closer. "I said, do you think he's coming for you?" Elijah lifted his head slightly. There was no fear in his expression, just resolve. "He's always watching." That unnerved Carter more than he wanted to admit. He turned away and pointed his phone at Elijah. The live stream had already started. Thousands of viewers were watching in real time, their comments racing across the bottom of the screen. Most didn't know what they were watching. Some thought it was a hoax. Others believed it was a hostage situation staged for attention. A few recognized Elijah, and even fewer recognized Carter. Carter's voice was shaky but loud as he addressed the camera. "This is Elijah Moore, son of Victor Moore. Some of you know the name. Most of you don't. That's the problem. The government keeps men like him in the dark, buried under redacted files and classified missions. But he's hiding something. He's hiding in this town, pretending to be someone he's not." He stepped closer to Elijah and pointed a trembling finger. And this kid is the bait. Let's see if the man behind the curtain has the guts to show up. He ended the monologue with a deep breath, then checked his watch. It had been 17 minutes since the feed started. Meanwhile, 22 miles away, Victor Moore's secure phone buzzed once. Unknown number. He didn't answer it. He never answered unknowns, but when it buzzed again, then a fourth time in quick succession, he picked it up. He said nothing. A voice greeted him with static and sarcasm. "Victor, we're live. Check your son's socials." Then the line went dead. Victor opened a secure browser, found the stream link already trending. And there was Elijah, tied, bruised, Carter's face in the frame. Victor didn't yell, didn't flinch. He closed the laptop, stood from his desk, and opened the drawer he hadn't touched in over a year. Inside was a small case, nothing lethal, just old tools from another life. He pulled out a penknife, a comms device, and the badge. Red border clearance. He stared at it for one beat. Then he stood. Angela met him at the door. Her eyes searched his. "Where is he?" Victor answered with his silence. Angela's jaw clenched. She stepped aside. "You come home with him." Victor nodded once, then vanished into the night. Back at the warehouse, Elijah shifted in the chair, wrists burning. His shoulders ached from tension. The duct tape pulled at his skin every time he adjusted. The live stream comments were flooding in. Most viewers didn't believe it was real. Some did. A few called the cops. But Carter was prepared. The location had no GPS signal. Cell reception was barely functional. Everything was routed through layers of proxies and private relays. He thought he was in control, until the door creaked. The live stream camera shook slightly as Carter turned. Boots, concrete, calm and precise. Victor Moore had arrived, alone. No drama, no headlights flashing across the wall. Just the unmistakable thump of purposeful footsteps that grew louder as the entrance creaked open. Elijah's body tensed. For the first time since the ordeal began, he inhaled fully. And Carter froze. Victor stepped into view. His coat was buttoned clean to the collar. His face unreadable. His hands were empty. No gun, no weapon, only presence. He stopped 20 feet from Carter. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Victor's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "You took my son." Carter tried to steady himself. "I'm uncovering the truth. That's all this is." Victor didn't blink. "You've gone beyond your badge. This isn't about a badge," Carter snapped, holding up the live stream phone again. "This is about answers, about the public's right to know who you really are. You think you get to walk around invisible, untouchable?" Victor's eyes slowly moved to Elijah. "Are you hurt?" Elijah's lips trembled slightly, but he shook his head. "No, I'm okay. I'm just tired." That made Victor's jaw tighten just barely. Then he turned back to Carter. "You think this is control? It's not. It's collapse." Carter stepped back, reaching into his pocket. "You walk in here with nothing. You really think you can stop this without force? You're not worth force." Victor's voice didn't rise. It didn't even shift in tone. That made Carter angrier. "You don't get to humiliate me again." He lunged, pulling a tactical baton from his belt. The camera caught it all. His forward momentum, his raised arm, the crack of his boots on the cement. But Victor moved like a whisper. No wasted motion. One hand deflected Carter's wrist. The other redirected his weight. Carter's baton dropped before he understood it was gone. Victor took one small step, hooked Carter's ankle with his heel, and spun his arm upward. Carter dropped like a sack of gravel. The live stream audience exploded in comments. Victor stood over him, calm as ever. "This is what happens when you confuse silence with surrender." Carter groaned, trying to sit up, but Victor wasn't done. He turned toward the phone, picked it up off the crate, and adjusted it until the viewers could see both him and Carter. "You've all seen it now," he said into the lens. "This is not how justice works. This is not how the truth is found. This is what desperation looks like when someone entrusted with power turns that trust into obsession." He gently set the phone down again, then returned to Elijah, slicing through the zip ties with a penknife pulled from inside his coat. Elijah stood slowly. His legs were weak, but he leaned into his father's steady arm. "You okay to walk?" "I am now," Elijah replied. The door burst open. Floodlights cut through the warehouse like daylight. Red and blue danced across the walls as squad cars surrounded the property. Dozens of officers entered, most with weapons raised, but lowered them instantly when they saw who was standing. Chief Wallace came in fast, stepping around boxes and crates until he reached Carter on the ground. "Jesus, what did you do?" Wallace muttered. Victor handed him a slim folder neatly sealed. "Everything's in there," he said. "Coordinates, witness names, entry timestamps, audio from the moment Carter took him. It's already been sent to the Civil Rights Division." Wallace took it without speaking. "Take him," he finally said to two nearby officers. Carter didn't resist. He didn't speak. The weight of what had just happened on camera in front of thousands settled over him like concrete. Victor turned to leave Elijah beside him, but Wallace called after him. "Victor." Victor turned. Wallace didn't say much, just nodded. There was respect in it, gratitude maybe, or simply acknowledgement that tonight had been about more than an arrest. It had been about the line between fear and fatherhood and who stood between the two. As Victor and Elijah walked through the warehouse doors, the crowd outside erupted in noise. Reporters, flashbulbs, community members, protesters who had followed the live stream all the way to the location. But none of that mattered to Elijah. He only looked at the man beside him. "You really didn't bring backup. I didn't need to," Victor said. "You were the only mission." They kept walking, past cameras, past whispers. Victor opened the car door, let Elijah sit, then got in himself. Neither spoke for a few minutes. Finally, Elijah whispered, "You knew he'd try something like this." Victor nodded. Desperation always turns theatrical. "You could have heard him. I did what was needed." Elijah turned toward the window, watching the swarm of police shrink in the rear view. "You know what people are saying online?" he asked quietly. Victor raised an eyebrow. "They're calling you a ghost, a living shadow, the man who ended a standoff with a sentence." Victor's lips quirked. "They don't need to know what I am. Just that you're safe." Elijah nodded. His throat tightened with something he hadn't been able to name since this started. Security. No longer just hope, but presence. Victor reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "I told you I'd come." "You did." They drove home without music, without fanfare. Just a father and his son out of the dark into the quiet. The sun rose differently over Crest Hill now. It no longer felt like something distant and indifferent. The warmth wasn't just in the air, but in the way people opened their doors, in how neighbors waved a second longer, in how curtains no longer twitched with suspicion when a black teenager walked down the street wearing a hoodie. Something had shifted. It didn't happen overnight, but it began with Truth Stream Live, undeniable, watched by millions. And then came change. Chief Wallace retired a month later. No press conference, no dramatic farewell. Just a letter taped to the precinct door, a resignation folded with dignity. The city council passed 3 new ordinances: mandatory bias training for all officers, civilian oversight for community complaints, an annual town hall where students could voice their fears directly to those in power. For the first time in years, people felt seen. But no one expected what Victor Moore did next. He bought the old gymnasium on Maple Street. No fanfare, no ads. Just a sheet of paper taped to the glass doors that read, "Coming soon, Moore Academy for Skills and Resilience." The first morning it opened, only 2 kids showed up. By the second week, the number had doubled. By the end of the month, they had a wait list. Victor didn't teach karate or boxing. He taught things no school dared touch. How to diffuse confrontation. How to control breathing in a panic. How to read body language, not to attack, but to anticipate. How to stand in a room full of people and not shrink, not shout, just be. Elijah helped after school. He swept floors. He set up mats. He ran drills with younger kids. But more than that, he became a symbol, not of trauma, but of strength forged through survival. One afternoon, a boy no older than 12 stayed behind after class. His name was Avery. Skinny. Quiet. Always looking over his shoulder, like someone had told him long ago that the world was out to get him. As Elijah handed him his backpack, the boy asked, "Were you scared when that man took you?" Elijah paused. He knelt to eye level. "Yeah," he said honestly. "I was terrified." Avery nodded slowly. "But you didn't cry." "Not then," Elijah admitted, "but I did later. And that's okay too." Avery didn't reply. He just smiled, small, crooked, and left. Victor had watched the exchange from the doorway. He didn't interrupt, just placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder afterward. "You did more for that kid in 10 seconds than I could in 10 weeks. Elijah didn't say anything, but his eyes reflected a quiet pride. Elsewhere in town, another ripple had formed. Mia Ramirez, the girl who had once hesitated behind a tree with a phone clutched to her chest, was now being interviewed on national podcasts and student-led press shows. Her footage had become part of training programs across the country. But she wasn't interested in fame. She wanted reform. With her father's support, she launched a digital media initiative called Youth Witness, a safe platform for students to document injustice and to be trained in ethical, impactful storytelling, because silence is protection for the wrong people, she told one reporter. And kids have phones, but they need voices too. One afternoon, she sat across from Elijah at the diner near their school. It had become a routine. Friday milkshakes and quiet updates. Guess what she said between sips? What they asked me to speak at the journalism symposium next spring. "Want to come?" Elijah smiled. "You just want a bodyguard in case you say something too real." "Exactly." They both laughed, but there was a pause afterward, one of those silences that meant something was coming. Mia looked at him seriously. "They want you to speak at graduation, Elijah." His smile faded slightly. He looked down at his hands. "Why me?" Mia leaned forward. "Because you're not just a story. You're a voice that didn't break. And people trust what you say, because you never tried to sound perfect." Graduation day came with the heavy air of June. Elijah stood behind the curtain backstage, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He hated ties, but Angela insisted. Victor stood beside him, hands in his pockets, quiet as always. "You nervous?" he asked. Elijah nodded. "What if I freeze? Then you breathe and speak anyway. What if I say the wrong thing?" Victor's eyes softened. "Then you say the truth." The principal called his name. Elijah stepped onto the stage. The auditorium stood most without even realizing it. Not because of pity, but because they knew who he was now. He adjusted the microphone. "Good evening," he began. "Some of you know my name. Some of you know what happened to me. But I don't want to talk about that tonight." He paused. "I want to talk about what happened after." He looked across the crowd, students, parents, faculty. "For a long time, I thought wearing a hoodie made me invisible, or dangerous, or suspicious. But I learned something. From my father, from my mother, from my community." He swallowed hard. "I learned that you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you fight it by refusing to burn." There was a beat of silence, not from awkwardness, but from impact. He continued, "I want the next kid who walks home with their head down to know they don't have to apologize for being seen. And I want the next adult watching them to ask themselves why they ever thought they should." Applause started slow. Then it built. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a standing acknowledgement. And in the third row, Victor finally allowed himself the smallest exhale of pride. That night, after the chairs were folded and the stage lights dimmed, Elijah and Victor walked home together. No cameras, no reporters, just father and son. Victor looked at Elijah. "You said everything that needed to be said." "I almost didn't go through with it," Elijah admitted. "I know, but you did." They passed by the community center, now painted bright blue with murals on the wall, showing kids jumping rope and playing chess. Someone had spray-painted a quote over the back door. "When light arrives, darkness doesn't disappear, it just backs up." Elijah read it aloud. "Do you believe that?" he asked. Victor looked up at the stars. "Yes, but only if people protect that light." "And what about you?" Elijah asked. "Are you staying?" Victor smiled faintly. "I'm not a ghost anymore, son." He paused. "I'm staying." In the end, people didn't remember Victor Moore for the things he once did in places they would never see. They remembered him for what he chose to do in plain sight. Not with weapons, not with vengeance, but with clarity, restraint, and unwavering love. He didn't burn the world down to prove his power. He taught it how to build something better. And through Elijah, through the children who now walked Crest Hill's streets without fear, through the community that learned to see past a hoodie and into a human being, Victor's legacy lived on. Because when truth finally stands tall, the shadows don't vanish, but they do step back. And sometimes the most powerful form of justice is not in what you take down, but in what you quietly lift up. And so the story of Elijah and Victor Moore closed not with revenge, but with healing. A father's quiet strength, a son's growing voice, and a community finally learning to listen. It reminded us that change doesn't always come in the form of protest or punishment. Sometimes it comes in a gentle refusal to stay silent, in a choice to stand firm even when no one is watching, and in the courage to raise a child who learns to do the same. This story isn't just about injustice. It's about what we choose to do after it, how we rebuild, how we speak, how we protect each other not with force but with presence, love, and the power to remain true to who we are. What about you? If you were in Elijah's shoes, what would you carry forward? If you were Victor, what would you be willing to leave behind to protect what matters most? If this story touched you, we invite you to share your thoughts below. Let us know which moment stayed with you. Leave a message not just for us, but for someone who might need it. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, we hope you'll like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us in spreading compassion, truth, and quiet strength, one story at a time. Thank you for being here. You matter, and your voice makes a difference.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.